Welcome. You've got 3 minutes. Gather yourselves. Class is in session shortly. Come on in, take your seat. Mike, you go on the YouTube feed. Excellent, thank you. We start in 2 minutes, everyone, in 2 minutes. Folks, if you're in the back, if you can hear my voice, it's time to sit down. Ladies and gentlemen, it is 7 p.m. Let's get this party started, shall we? All right. Welcome. My name is Maggie John. I am the former Corporation Counsel of Milwaukee County.
And that
I was
darn
there for the COVID situation and the 2020 recount, so I've seen a few things. I left that position in 2024, and I hosted my own radio show, The Maggie Dawn Show, which was quite a hoot. Now I'm here with you all today, and these fine candidates. What a wonderful thing to have a contested primary, everyone. How about a hand for this? I want to thank State Indivisible South Shore for their trust in me this evening, to the candidates and campaigns, to Baby High School, especially everyone working on all of the audio-visual and logistics. We thank you so very much. Of course, and of course we thank NPS, all current NPS students and graduates. It is public education that brings us here this evening. If you weren't aware, this evening's forum is dedicated to education, and so I would be remiss if we did not acknowledge every single public school teacher, past and present. As a proud Indivisible High School graduate, my thanks to every teacher I have ever had. Ringers off, ladies and gentlemen. If you've got your phones out, make sure you mark the primary. It is August 11th. If you're not sure where you vote, go to myvote.wi.gov. Now with that, just a few housekeeping measures this evening. If there is inclement weather or a tornado warning, all will go off, even if you have your ringers. Please proceed orderly down the stairs to the first floor. There will be folks directing you where you need to go. Broadcast information, you'll be able to see this afterwards. It is live broadcasting now on YouTube. Then you'll have 2 minutes to answer questions. The 30-second warning before their time has expired. It's a forum, we're all friends here. Everyone will, of course, abide by the time limit. There will be no rebuttals. One note before we begin with the first question. In the information provided to candidates ahead of time, we urge candidates to think beyond applause lines and some of their talking points, to really explain to all of you as we approach the primary how they will accomplish objectives, and most importantly, what compromises might be necessary, and how the heck are we going to pay for these things. So again, we're focusing on education this evening. No questions are straight yes or no questions. We provided the candidates with notepads and pens. They cannot bring materials onto the stage because some of the questions might be a little wonky. So, the order of questions and seating today was randomized. We're going to begin with Lieutenant Governor Sarah Rodriguez. It's a pleasure to see you again, my friend. And one last note, don't leave early. This is an audience participation forum. There will be a QR code where you can give us all some feedback about what we've heard tonight, if it might impact your choice come August 11th. That QR code will be displayed on the screen once the forum has concluded. So with that, any questions from the candidates? Seeing none, they're all old hats at this point now. Let's dive right in, shall we? And the big one, the one that we all know is an issue, is school funding. Public school funding is broken. 72 Wisconsin school districts had funding referendums this past spring on the ballot. I reviewed all of your campaign websites because I'm a nerd and do my homework. And all of you, in some form or another, support the following 3 things. Correcting the general school aid formula to better account for the students and districts with the greatest needs. Secondly, you all support adjusting the per pupil revenue limits to finally account for inflation, something the state has not done for decades. Thirdly, you all support equalizing the special education reimbursement rate among voucher and public schools. Currently, voucher schools receive reimbursement at approximately 90%, and with last year's biennial budget, public schools trail that, maxing out in a year or two at just above 30%, in inequity indeed. So it's not enough to say that you all support these things, they cost money. So to fund these priorities, you gotta cut somewhere, you gotta create more revenue, or there must be a trade-off of some sort. So, Lieutenant Governor Rodriguez, first of all, do you agree with these priorities? And if you do, what might you be willing to cut, tax, or compromise about to achieve these objectives?
Thank you so much for having me here today. I just really appreciate putting this going on. We have to make sure that we have the best school system in the country. We have been there before, we can get there again, and it is about funding our schools curriculum. So yes, I agree with the priorities that we stated, but it's more than that. We cannot have a strong state without strong kids and strong schools. And so what I would be
Lieutenant Governor, just put your mic a bit more up to your face. Everyone talk as loud as you possibly can.
I'm eating the mic with this moment.
There we go.
Okay, so what we have to do is completely overhaul the funding formula that we have for the schools. Right now, schools are being funded very categorically. They do not look holistically at the child. We have to make sure we are looking at that full child and giving the schools the resources they can need appropriately. Whether that is poverty, whether that is disability, whether that is English language learners, we have to make sure we are funding the schools the way they need to. When we talk about funding, the money is there within our budget. It is how we allocate it. Who are we giving tax cuts to? And one of the areas that I think we can do to bring additional revenue into the state is we can regulate and legalize marijuana in the state of Wisconsin. We know that other states have done this for over 10 years. We can do this appropriately, and we can use that funding to make sure we are fully funding our public schools. We know we're going to get additional revenue. We know we're going to be able to take some of those tax dollars that we're already getting for tax breaks be able to fund public schools. That's how we're going to reduce property taxes in the state of Wisconsin.
We'll ask you to hold your applause to the end. We've got good questions we want to get to. State Senator Paula Royce, nice to see you.
Thank you. I'm just delighted to be with all of you here tonight and glad I was able to get here safely. I'm Paula Royce, and I'm running for governor to raise wages, to lower costs, to fully fund our public schools, and protect our rights and freedoms from this dangerous authoritarian regime. Now, I am a public education candidate in this race because the reason I am in this state is because it was the public education state. My parents moved here from other parts of the country because they knew as a family of honest means they could give their kids a great life because of our public education system. And we moved to rural northern Wisconsin, north of Highway 29 in Taylor County, because the schools were that good. I can see as a mom and step on the five that what my kids are getting are not the same as what my sisters and I got, and that is not okay with me. We have the resources to make Wisconsin the very best place to go to school. We're simply making bad public policy choices. I will raise taxes on millionaires and billionaires. They need to pay their fair share and if they're getting a free ride in the Walmart club. I will bring the vouchers fee, which diverts $1.5 billion in every budget to private and public schools. I will bring that program to a responsible close. Not overnight, but over time, I have a first-step plan to do it. I will look for new revenue sources, like ending the subsidies that we are giving to data centers, and to give commuters through the manufacturing and agriculture tax credit. And, of course, I want to legalize cannabis to help pay for early childhood education, because we don't start learning in kindergarten. We start the minute we're born. But the one thing I'm not going to do is put the burden for funding our public schools on the property taxpayers. That was Tom Tiffany's plan and Scott Walker's plan. Our plan, my plan, will give to property taxpayers relief and give our kids the future that they deserve.
County Executive David Crowder.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I want to first and foremost say thank you for being here. I also want to say thank you to South Shore Indivisible for organizing this event as well. When it comes down to school funding, it's extremely important. And for me, it's a full circle moment because I'm sitting on stage at my alma mater. Graduated from Bayview High School, Martin Public School alumni. All three of my daughters also attend our public school systems. And it is asinine the fact that so many of our public school systems are going to referendum in order to pay for the basic operations that they need to teach our children. And so first and foremost, we have to make sure that we're looking at all the different levels of tax credits that we've been giving out, tax breaks. We look at the manufacturing and agricultural credit. It's time that we actually shift those funds back to our schools because we have to look at education as one of the most core economic development initiatives, investments that we can be making here in the state of Wisconsin. Because if we're not investing in our children, there's nothing else that we really have. And so we can legalize cannabis here in the state of Wisconsin because we have millions of dollars that we've been leaving out on the table, going to Minnesota, going to Michigan, going to Illinois. It feels like Wisconsin is a donut hole when it comes down to legalization. And it's time for us to use those dollars and really put them to work here in our own state by legalizing it. But I would say, when we talk about legalization, we also have to talk about how we also decriminalize it. That's a whole other conversation. But it's also extremely important that we come up with two different types of plans. We need a short-term plan, but we also need a long-term plan. Short-term, we can be utilizing the budget surplus that we currently have in the state of Wisconsin. But long-term, we need to be planning not just every 2 years, but I would say for the next 5 to 10 years. And it's unfortunate that our biennial budget really doesn't give our school districts across the state the opportunity to actually plan long-term because the investments that we're giving to our schools aren't actually long-term investments. They change every 2 years. And so there's so much more that we can do, but it's bringing that political will, not just from the governor candidates, but also when it comes down to the state assembly and the state senate. So let's make sure that we're actually focused on getting that trifecta to get that funding.
Thank you, County Executive Representative Long.
Thank you all so much for being here. I heard the question asked about what would be cut, if there would be taxes, would there be compromise? And first let's recognize and think about how we got here. Public education is one of the last remaining democratic institutions in our country. If we do not have strong public schools, we do not have strong democracy. That's why it's been attacked for so many years. And I think what we cannot compromise on is our kids' education, the well-being of our educators, and making sure that all communities know that regardless of where we send their kids, that we need strong public schools, we have strong communities. Yes, we absolutely have to tax the billionaires and add an additional tax bracket for millionaires. We need to get down to actual specifics. 1% of that highest income earner and an additional 17% on those who are hitting their million-dollar income. We do have to cut the corporate fat. We heard sales tax exemptions that have to be eliminated for data centers. We have to make sure that the corporate tax rate is actually equitable and one that is not lower than what so many other small businesses have. And we should never compromise on what benefits are offered to our educators. There's a bill right now in the legislature that is at the ready to ensure that our public school teachers are eligible for the same health insurance benefits that I get and Robert Ross get and some of my colleagues up here get as well. It has to do with holistically, yes. I don't think it's going to be enough to just legalize cannabis and look at corporate tax cuts. We have to be willing to have the political courage to be able to use those surplus dollars that are in our state, those surplus dollars towards fully funding public education, including 90% special education reimbursement. That special education reimbursement has to be that short term, while we look long term at fully funding schools with a more equitable school funding formula and actually make sure we are meeting a constitutional obligation to ensure that every child has a sound and basic education.
Former CEO and Secretary of the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation will listen to CEOs.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for making an effort to come out tonight, especially with the weather, and I'm glad we are all here safely. And I'm really glad that you all have chosen to engage in what's an incredibly important time for Wisconsin as we essentially choose a new government. I really appreciate that this question is about how we pay for what we want to provide, because of course we want to make Wisconsin's public schools the very first choice for parents as they are making the decisions about where to send their kids. I want them to say, I would absolutely and will absolutely send my kids to Wisconsin schools because they are the very best. And the funding formula, the 2/3 funding formula, is put in place to create a partnership between the state and local districts to ensure that local districts have the control to be able to provide for their students, but that the whole state was participating in making sure we were providing the education that our children need. We have gotten so far away from that, and so we absolutely have to reinvent and rethink about how we fund our public schools, and that is work that we all have to take up. We hear it in every corner of the state. I'm sure my colleagues would agree with me on that. But we have to pay for these things, and it's expensive. And we can't just continue to rely on every Wisconsinite to reach into their pockets and find more money. We need to develop the economy. We need to grow the economy so that we have more revenue, more in our coffers across the state. That means bringing in business. It means creating jobs. It means helping small businesses on our main streets all around the state. It means making sure that we are working every day to advance our state and be leading in the things that we are so good at, like agriculture and manufacturing. We do have to do this work because we cannot anticipate that there will just be more that we can find under the mattress or in a millionaire's pocket. Of course we need to have everyone pay their fair share, but the only way that we can have economic justice and fund our public schools is to have economic growth, and I would do that as governor.
Thank you. Former Lieutenant Governor Mandel Barnes.
Well, thank you all so much. I'm Mandela Barnes, former Lieutenant Governor. Really excited to be here today and excited to be in the race to become the next governor of the state of Wisconsin. I am a proud Milwaukee Public School graduate, also a proud supporter of Milwaukee Public Schools and its ability to continue to be able to function, because when Milwaukee Public Schools was on the chopping block just a few years ago, I helped lead the fight to make sure that we could save MPS. Now, it was a tough fight. I'm still catching a lot of flack from it from the other side. But I can tell you, I will do it again in a heartbeat because our children are worth it. Now, as a proud public school graduate, you get to see the world. This is an experience that is unique because nothing truly surprises you anymore. It's shaping the world. It's made me a better person, a better friend, a better citizen. And to that point, this is exactly why Republicans are trying to take away public education and divert our dollars to a private school system that has been ineffective To that point, everybody's mentioned that we do have to fully fund our public schools, which is paramount. The 2/3 funding requirement is a baseline. It is a necessity for our schools to function. And when we ask how are we going to pay for it, the answers are very simple, quite honestly. We have the money. We've just been spending it wrong. It's been a priorities mismatch in the state for a long time. The former governor implemented the largest cut of public education in the history of the state, the largest in this country at that point. And if we can come up with a multi-million-dollar package to give out to professional sports teams, the least we can do is put that money into our schools and prioritize our future by investing in young people across the state of Wisconsin. We also have to prioritize support for our students who are dealing with significant challenges that make it difficult to have a prosperous learning journey. A lot of our children, especially here in Milwaukee, living in abject poverty. When I was in the legislature, the statistic was 1 in 19 students in Milwaukee Public Schools is homeless. Now, how do you expect a student population that has been so severely disadvantaged to be able to keep up with their counterparts? And that's why I've been a proud supporter of the community school model. And again, how will we pay for it? The money is there. We tax billionaires, we reform the agricultural manufacturing tax credits, and for any dollar we get back to put into professional sports teams should also go back to our public schools.
Thank you. Former Secretary of the Department of Administration, under Governor Evers, and current President of the Greater Milwaukee Committee, Mr. Bill Benedict.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for being here tonight. I'm proud to be in Milwaukee Public Schools, proud to have been a parent of 2 Milwaukee Public School graduates. My son and daughter are here. They spent a combined 20 years inside MPS schools, and we are city residents, and I'm proud of the work that goes on inside MPS. If we're going to do what we need around public education, there are a dose of a couple things that we need. 1 is courage, 2 is honesty, 3 is transparency. Courage meaning that when it was already mentioned, in the spring, when we were all celebrating that Chris Taylor won statewide, there were 72 school districts that went for referendum, but 60 of those went for referendum and for operations, just to keep the lights on. This is what happens. I was talking to the mayor of Glendale today. They passed a 4-year referendum for $20 million just to keep the lights on and things running. That is a condemnation. That means that we're failing what is going on at the state level, and that is trickling down, and that we're pitting taxpayers against public school students. That's no longer good enough in Wisconsin. So the courage we need is a governor who will stand by his convictions, a legislature with a couple of other allies in it so that we can change the school funding formula, institute what most other states have. Put the kid at the center, add for special education, add for English language learners, add for poverty. That's what we need to do. We need also transparency. You ask where we can cut to do this. The largest voucher recipient in the state of Wisconsin is really a virtual school. $45 million of vouchers went to a school that really doesn't have much of a gymnasium or a classroom or anything. Those are the types of things where we can make value judgments and we can start to make changes. The other thing that we need to be is utterly transparent. In the legislature, in the last budget, they said they were going to introduce special education rates that were going to be reimbursed at 42%. When the dollars came down, it was really in the low 30s. That's not good enough for us in Wisconsin. A level of transparency that is honest, that has integrity, that pushes us to where we need to be. Those are the kind of things we need to do to get to the education system we want.
Thank you, candidates. Our next question is about mental health supports in schools. We're going to start on this end since you've got the mic. How will your administration address mental health in schools? Specifically, how will you provide dedicated funding for social workers, psychologists, and counselors, each of whom fulfill a unique role in every school for every student, despite the fact that these positions are often first on the chopping block when school budgets are stretched? Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Yeah, and this is a problem in the Milwaukee public schools. It's a problem in rural schools. It's a kind of a symptom of the larger problem that we have in public education, where so many of the issues that are being asked to be addressed in the classroom are ones that happen outside the schoolhouse door. There is challenges that we have right now around social media, around stress, around academics, family challenges. In many places, it's around the lack of housing and issues that people have around there. So there is a heaviness around mental health that is a challenge for everybody. The first thing that I would do, it's not necessarily around schools, but it's something more global. Mental health has to be part of basic health care in Wisconsin. We have a fractured system no matter what, regardless of what happens in the classroom. And we need to make sure that every student, every person in Wisconsin understands that mental health is part of their basic health. What do we have to do in schools? There are way too many times where people in schools are asked to do all too many things, and mental health is one of those things. So we need to make sure that we have the basics covered, that people are learning what they need in schools, that the positions are covered. It does go back to ultimately the school funding formula that we have that allows us to, that really keeps us from having the positions funded in our schools that are totally necessary. It happens on the academic side, it happens on the mental health side. So there are things we need to do as a state to ensure that we are investing as much as we need to in these spots. But overall, and basically, we need to just make sure that we are doing right by our students. They are the future of our state. We have done way too little to meet their needs when it comes to their overall mental health. Those challenges got worse during COVID. The academic recovery has not been what we would like, but we also need to ensure that we are meeting them where they need, in the classroom, outside the classroom, and everywhere that they are going to. We need to make sure that they have the future that they need.
Lieutenant Governor Barnes.
So yes, mental health support for our students is critically important, it is critically missing. And one of the bigger challenges is, as we have a mismatch in funding for different school districts across the state, some school districts just miles apart. Now, where we have the biggest need is where we unfortunately have the fewest resources. A lot of more wealthy school districts have been able, and this is nothing against them, I am very happy that those students are getting the support that they need. But if we can have this reality in any one school building or any one school district, it should be the reality for every school building and every school district, especially those who are the most challenged. Now, this goes back to my previous point. We have the money, it is being spent wrong. For every dollar that we spend on mental health support, whether it's professionals in the building or even outside the building, a lot of our students, the only place to get their mental or physical health needs addressed is in the school building. But whether it's social workers, whether it's school nurses, every dollar that we invest in making sure that all of our students are on a level playing field is money that we save on the back end, because unfortunately, those students who continue to have their needs not met are the ones who become adults and end up in our criminal justice system, which has become a drain on our resources and has plagued our society for far too long. The way that we can help divert it or make sure that people can be on a career path instead of a path to incarceration is by making sure that every issue that they are dealing with internally, because these students are dealing with heavier things than any adult would have to deal with. I mentioned the high levels of poverty. I mentioned the students who unfortunately don't have homes to go to at night, but also the instances of crime that so many of our students have to deal with. The weight that they carry every single day, our students that have to go to work to provide for their own families. These are needs that go unaddressed, and when it does not happen, unfortunately, we lose them into very difficult, dangerous, and unnecessary paths in life. We have to pay a lot more for it back end.
Secretary Hughes.
When a child has a mental health issue and problem, as a parent, you are trying to understand how to fix it. It is not a broken leg, it's not a broken arm, and you need to have all hands on deck to help solve that, and you need help at school to make sure that the support is there for your child. And this is what we need to provide. We have to recognize the true accounting of removing mental health professionals from our schools, the burden that puts on our teachers and our administration, the burden that puts on the students and on the classmates and on the families. There is cost associated with all of that burden that we create when we don't have someone to step in and provide the support that a student or a child needs. And that's why we have to be thinking about this in a way that is much more holistic, in a way that says, if you don't have mental health care providers in the schools, you will have this cost and this cost and this cost associated with it. And once you recognize that, you can see that the costs associated with investing in having professional professionals in the schools available for the students in all of our districts, whether it's urban or rural, is critically important. We also have to make sure that we create those providers because we have a shortage of mental health care providers across the state. And where we see students interested in entering into mental health care, we need to help them get through that with things like tuition rates and supporting them through their training and making sure that their training is achievable without obstacles. There's lots of work to do on this, but the cost of not doing that work is much greater than it will ever be of making those investments.
Senator Hong. I was fortunate enough to go to a mental health roundtable in West Bend, and one of the parents there was actually a school psychologist. And he noted something that really, it stuck with me, in that the districts, we as a community actually have a responsibility to help provide the skills and tools for our parents to also help our kids at home. That for a lot of the psychologists, counselors, and social workers in our schools are, of course, getting burned out, but our students are actually at they're not stopping having their struggles just at school. It's happening at home and they happen at a job that they're working at as well. So how can we continue to provide resources, tools, and skills for not just family members, but folks in the community? Because the reality is, of course, we need to be addressing the workforce shortages and the challenges of folks not going into the fields of social work and counseling for our community. That means the community has to start stepping up, and we have to think about sharing resources with communities that help all of our kids. This is going to need additional trainings and peer support that the Department of Health Services should offer for more schools. This is going to require us making sure that there is investment in community centers and programs for our youth to go to outside the out-of-school time as well. I completely agree that for, just like our educators, students will learn better from folks or receive information better from people who share their lived experiences. How can we make sure that we have counselors and social workers and psychologists who share their experience with some of our most vulnerable students and make sure that education is accessible for them to get their higher education degrees to do their clinical work? So, yes, funding absolutely critical, but we need to think more in terms of how can a community be a reflection of the school community, and that means folks learning more about the mental health resources and skills that not only do we need to share with our students, but make sure that we're actually sharing with one another as well.
County Executive Pro.
We must invest in mental health. If we don't invest in mental health like we do physical health, we're basically telling people that they don't know. You know, mental health is extremely important to me because I grew up in a household that had its own mental health issues. And I will tell you that it's not just affecting our students, it's also affecting our teachers. Because we don't have the necessary nurses, the psychologists, the counselors, teachers have become everything to our students. They are the counselor, they are the psychologist, they are the social worker. And in some cases, they become a guardian. And so it's extremely important that we're expanding more services for young people when it comes down to suicide prevention, for our teachers when it comes down to trauma-informed care, and making sure that our young people have access to substance use treatment as well, because we know what they're doing. It's extremely important that we allow this to happen in our schools, and this is why I truly believe in the community school model, because our schools should be the one-stop shop. Parents should just drop their kids off and then decide they're going to go somewhere else, especially if they need assistance, and we can provide them mental health care here as well. Provide the students with mental health care, provide the teachers with mental health care. Strengthening mental health across this state is going to be a Herculean effort. Because what many people may not know is that Washington County, we're one of the very few counties that actually has a system. It's imperfect, but we have a system. You think about other communities like the Cross and rural community areas, they don't have access to mental health professionals. And there's also a shortage. And so we have to work hard as a state to make sure that we are creating pipelines for individuals to go into this profession. And if we don't have enough people who are willing to provide, then we need to make sure that we are partnering with local organizations, with the hospital systems, to make sure that the opportunities are there to provide that level of support. Because the more and more we turn a blind eye to mental health, the more unhealthy our community is going to become.
Senator Lewis.
Every child deserves access to high-quality, school-based mental health care. But for that vision to be realized, we need to make sure that there is a full-time mental health professional in every single school in the state. And you're right, it is often the first thing on the chopping block when budgets are tight. And budgets have been tight because of 30 years of bad Republican policies divesting from public education. I will change that, and this commitment is personal to me. My mom is a mental health professional. I grew up with her welcoming people into our home who were experiencing mental health crises rather than being hospitalized or institutionalized. She pioneered a program that became a global model for how to help people that were struggling with mental health. And I just thought it was normal that we had people coming and staying with us when they were in the middle of this crisis. In the assembly, I was really proud to champion back in 2009 the passage of mental health parity in this state, but we have a long way to go. And now in the Senate, as a member of the Joint Finance Committee, which writes the state budget, I hope to champion a $300 million investment in school-based mental health. And of course, the Republicans took it out. We need to make sure that our schools have the funding that they need, but we also, as David said, we have to increase that pipeline of providers. Because it is expensive to go to college and get that treatment, and it is expensive to get your training and your hours, so we have to make college affordable. And we have to pay people when they're doing the practical and getting their hours, so that we forgive loans if you're going to serve in a high-needs area like mental health. More broadly, we have to make this society one where young people don't have to face the mental health challenges that we do. Tackling gun violence with responsible gun safety laws, so that kids don't have to be afraid. Making sure that kids have access to arts and sports and theater and music, things that we know enhance their lives. And getting rid of the cell phones and regulating big tech that is destroying the sense of self and identity and wellness. That's what our kids deserve, really is.
Lieutenant Governor Rodriguez. So I'm a nurse by background. I have been on the front lines watching the mental health crisis for my entire career. I was an emergency room nurse watching as people came in crisis and not get the type of care that they needed. Whether it was working within public health agencies, local, state, federal, trying to create the system where people can actually access care within their community. Or whether it's been as Lieutenant Governor. I was the chair of the Healthcare Workforce Task Force, and this was one quote that stands out to me that I heard all over the state. That if we could double the number of mental health providers in the state of Wisconsin, and it still would not be enough. And this is particularly true for those who care for children. That is the actual gap that we have is so much more significant in those that will actually accept children as patients. So I was really proud with the Rodriguez administration to put the $300 million within the budget for mental health for children across the state. And once again, the Republican-led leadership took that out and brought it down to $30 million. Just a drop in the bucket for what we actually need within this state. So my plan is to make sure that we have mental health providers within the state. It includes a dedicated funding for support services for mental health, but not only that, for our teaching assistants, for our counselors, for our nurses, to be able to make sure that we don't have to cut them right away when the budgets get tight. Making sure we have the funding to be able to do what the schools need to do to make sure that we are truly treating issues before they occur. We either pay for it now or we pay for it later. And that's what I want to do. Let's take care of our kids now.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Rodriguez. Senator Lewis will be first up with this next question. Let's talk about school safety. Many have expressed concerns about law enforcement officers being placed into schools, also known as school resource officers or SROs. What is your view of the proper role of law enforcement in public schools, specifically SROs? And if you have concerns about law enforcement officers in public schools, how do we balance that with the need that some express to harp our public schools as targets and physical building security? If you would start, Senator Rice, and then we'll come down here and we'll that mic right back to the Lieutenant Governor.
As an attorney, I am absolutely committed to community safety, and no place should be safer than our schools. But I really hear and understand the concerns of people who say that the presence of police do not always make schools safer. And in fact, we see that sometimes the safest neighborhoods, the safest communities, you don't see visible presence of armed police officers, right? But we also want to make sure that the police that are responding and interacting with children do have special training because schools are different. And in my view, the idea of responding to threats in our community, not with evidence-based policies to pass responsible gun safety regulation, but instead to militarize our schools, to harden them, to put metal detectors in, so that our young people feel like they're going into a prison rather than a learning environment, that is wrong. That's not what I want for my kids or yours. I want the adults in the room to make responsible choices that keep our kids safe. And we can do that without violating anybody's rights. I'm also a big believer in local control. And this is an area where Republicans have attacked the ability of local school districts and municipalities to make their own policies that work for those communities. Because something that works up in Medford, where I'm from, or in Madison, where I live now, may be very different. So the commitment to local control and public safety has to be. But again, safety in school is also about a sense of belonging and a sense of inclusion. It's not just guns that we have to be afraid of. We need to make sure that our kids feel psychologically safe. And that comes with the climate that we're creating in schools and making sure that everyone, no matter who you are, or where you're from, or how you're walking into that school, that you feel welcome. And that's what our public schools do.
County Executive Pro.
Safety in our schools should be the number one thing, right? But I don't think that the state legislature should be dictating or telling any school or school district or any local public schools that they have to have school resource officers in their schools. If a school district chooses that, they have the right to choose that. But they should not be forced to do that from any legislative body other than the school board. When it comes down to school safety, I think what we need to really be focusing on is the morale and how we have, as Senator Boyce was speaking to, how we have psychologically attacked many of the students in our public schools. Because how some people, who don't even have children in our public schools, by the way, believe how certain children should be taught, right? I don't think that any school, no school should be banning books because we're basically saying that you're not safe in a place to actually read whatever you feel that is right for you to read. And so I truly think that it's not just about working with law enforcement. The law enforcement have a role, absolutely. I think that we could be working with community members and actually investing in community violence interrupters like we have here in the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County. We have been investing in 414 Life and many nonprofit organizations to actually work on the streets, build relationships with these young people, and even through our advanced peace model, making sure that we can stop the retaliatory violence which we have seen a reduction in here in Milwaukee County because we're putting our money where our mouth is. Law enforcement plays a role, but they're only there for after the fact. There's so much more that we need to be doing in making sure that we're investing upstream for our young people, so violence is never an option, but also that we're creating the biggest and the most safest of safe places, because that's what our schools should be. I was always told that if something was to happen when I was a young kid and I was lost, go to the school, because that is the safest place. But unfortunately, for many school districts across this state, it's become the most unsafe place. And we need to change it.
Representative Vaughn.
I committed to, on day one, calling a special session to have the state legislature take on common sense gun safety reform. So background checks, red flag laws, and safe storage. When it comes to school resource officers and decisions around safety for our schools, I think it's paramount we listen to our students. Ensuring that we have student representation on school boards, absolutely. But our students right now are organizing. They are, regardless if it's Milwaukee, Madison, up to Superior, I think we continue to underestimate young people, and it is to our own peril. Many students feel unsafe when there's a bigger presence of armed law enforcement in their schools. And it is going to take a community response, a community supporting students to help make our schools safer. And I agree with some of my colleagues here that it does need to be a local control system. The state should not dictate or tell a community that they have to have on enforcement in their schools. But I think who is at the decision-making table and how those decisions are made make even more transparent, so more folks in the community know and understand what's happening in their schools. Public safety is, we have to get serious about public safety, and that comes both on preventing crime, supporting young people with programs, knowing that they can go and be creative, feel safe, and be themselves, and making sure that the people who are in the classrooms living the threats and the struggles and the challenges of what so many young people are going through, whether it be mental health, economic instability, existing as a person right now in this world is a lot. It has to always be a very comprehensive collective response. But I think when it comes to safety in schools, it's paramount that we listen to our kids.
Secretary Hughes.
If the question about safety in schools is honestly answered, we need to look at whether we're talking about a danger coming from outside the school, or a danger within the school. And that is what needs to guide our responses. If we are concerned about a danger coming from outside of the school, I 100% agree with Representative Long. We need to move forward on common sense gun safety laws, and we need to make sure that we're enforcing those laws and that we are protecting all of our population, but most especially our students, from threats from guns. If there is a question that it is violence within the schools, then we have to work with the teachers. We have to work with the parents and the administrators to address that. We can't expect law enforcement officials to come in and be able to relate to what is happening to students within the school. Teachers know what students are facing, whether it's with academics, with mental health, with their family issues. They can step in and help with those issues and should be the lead on that. We don't have the ability to train our law enforcement officials to be able to answer to every issue that comes up. And if we do need to have law enforcement in a school, we need to tell the students why. We need to be transparent about why there are law enforcement there so that we can mitigate fear that they are witnessing, wondering, what's that guy doing here? Who's he going after? What is all happening? That affects the entire student body immediately. We saw it again and again as we had trainings for shootings and things like that at our school, or we had drug issues in our high schools. These are issues that the kids immediately start to wonder what's going on. And so having that transparency, the kids can handle it if you're honest and you are truthful about the issues that we're facing.
Lieutenant Governor Barnes.
Every student deserves high quality education, and every student deserves to be able to go to school, come back home, and not have to worry about the threat of gun violence or violence of any kind. And as you know, different school districts all across the state, all across the country, have different needs, have different wants, and also have different challenges. To that point, I want to be sure that our local school boards are equipped to have the authority to set policy that is most appropriate for their jurisdiction. What we don't need is state mandates, especially as these state mandates have been unfunded. And these unfunded mandates have cost school districts so much money that has taken away an opportunity for new teachers to be hired, for teachers' assistants to be hired, for support staff to be hired. To even go back to the previous question, mental health professionals aren't able to be funded in a lot of school districts because of state mandates that require them to pay for SROs themselves. This is a huge problem that we have, and it's not productive. And again, this is all part of the Republican-controlled legislature's policy to be able to enact their will on school districts that they have zero regard for. These legislators wouldn't show up to these school districts and spend a day walking around with students. They wouldn't spend any time getting experience with the teachers to figure out what's actually going on. And if you are willing to do that, then you shouldn't be setting policy for schools and school districts. Now, a part of that safety equation, again, is making sure that we're doing everything we can on the front end, making sure that all of our students have the resources and support that they need when they go home at night, and everything they need when they show up to school. And in many instances, this could be something as simple as schools being able to provide meals for students. This could also mean that we have after-school programs that are fully funded so that our children, that our students are actually building relationships with each other in real life and not just on social media where so much can get misconstrued, which leads to a lot of the disagreements that we've seen in our schools that has led to acts of violence. We have to be so much smarter in the way that we do things. And if the only response that we have is providing more requirements for SROs than actually meeting the needs of our students, then we're doing this backwards, and unfortunately, we're going to lose a whole generation of students. This is why investing in the whole child is the most common sense approach that we can take when it comes to fully providing education to our students as it is necessary.
Secretary Brennan.
I'm going to echo some of what the others have said about the first issue being this state preemption and the state requiring it. It's not just what happens inside the schoolhouse, but it happens in tax policy, it happens in law enforcement, it happens in environmental regulations where the state has just said, you local government, where the rubber hits the road, you actually don't have any decision-making authority on it. So I think that started under the Walker administration, it's continued because the legislature has continued. I think we need to get back, I think I would echo what all of us up here would say is that we're going to get back to a time where there is the right kind of partnership between state and local government. That includes state and school districts. Now, I have visited school districts and I have seen a very healthy relationship between school resource officers and those in the classroom. I was in Sauk Prairie and I saw a school resource officer who knew the names of all the kids, and it was what we used to think about the way things should be. I think there is absolutely positive things that can happen. If you have another set of eyes, if you have another set of informed people who are in the classroom with people and in there, you can understand where there may be self-harm, where there may be things coming up in the classroom, where there may be things that are happening outside. All of those things can be valuable. But when the state mandates that, or when the state does it, it brings the response that we've had in Milwaukee, where oftentimes the kids see this as just punitive. So we need to absolutely do that. Now, the other thing that we absolutely need to do when it comes to schools is around school safety. My son is here, he's a freshman in college. He goes to school in Providence, Rhode Island. You all remember what happened at Brown. He goes to a school across town. His first semester in college ended without exams because there were 2 people who were killed across town. Every kid that comes into a classroom, they don't look around to see where the school board or where the blackboard is. They look around to see where they can get out if somebody comes in and shoots. That's not worthy of us as Wisconsinites or Americans. Those are the kind of things that we need to do to have common sense gun laws to ensure that we're making the changes we need to make.
Folks, we're about halfway there, wiggle around in your seat. I know, I'm just giving time to get the mic out. That was my fill. So take a breath, everyone, as we get the mic out. Lieutenant Governor Rodriguez.
Thank you. Again, as a public health nurse, when you're talking about school resource officers, that's way downstream as to what we should be doing, and we should be intervening way earlier with the resources that we've already talked about. Mental health, nursing, counselors, making sure we have the right number of teachers, the right number of teaching assistants, so that we can prevent some of these things from occurring. But we would be remiss if we did not talk about, which many of us on this stage have talked about, the #1 killer of our children in the United States is gun violence. My son, he's 19 now, but he was in first grade when Sandy Hook massacre happened. And I remember coming home after that and just sobbing while I helped him, thinking this could have been my child. And then as I read more and more, there was a little boy in Sandy Hook who had the same exact birth date as my son. Noah Posner. And I remember that name, and I remember his family, so that I can remember what we're fighting for. If we want to talk about public safety, we want to talk about our kids, we have got to address gun safety in Wisconsin, and we've got to address gun safety all across the country. The fact that we had so many children murdered so many years ago. And we have done nothing to stop that. It is infuriating to me as a mother and as a nurse. And we're going to need people who have the courage to be able to put this type of legislation in place. Common sense gun safety legislation. And we know that when we ask Wisconsinites what they want us to do this.
Thank you, Madam Lieutenant Governor. County Executive Crowley will begin with you. Teachers are scapegoated. Public school teachers are scapegoated every day. If you could please address teacher retention and development, as well as salary and benefits, as well as teacher performance evaluations. Open-ended question.
With all the teachers in here, thank you for all the work that you do. Because when I think about my upbringing, if it wasn't for the public schools, if it wasn't for the teachers and mentors that I had within the public schools, I would not be here today. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you. But the first thing that we could do is we can rebuild our time, making sure that we're actually giving back the dignity, the respect, and the compensation our teachers absolutely deserve because they are taking care of our most precious commodity, which is our children. And I know that you all have been scapegoated. Republicans for decades, starting with during the Scott Walker era, he's been coming after teachers for so long because we know that the Republicans, they don't want an educated society. Because the more that we know, the more that we're going to continue to push back on these bad policies. Because, I'll be honest, it feels like they peeing on us, they want to tell us it's raining. It's time for us to really change this, right? And so when it comes down to our teachers, we really need to bring back the dignity and respect. And it starts with making sure that we're giving local control, but also working with our school boards to make sure that they have processes and things in place to make sure that our teachers are getting the kudos that they absolutely need. But it also starts at the state level. We have to make sure that we are working with our teachers to figure out what more can we do for you, because I know that there are many teachers who are sticking around even longer because there's not enough young people in the pipeline to actually work in these schools. And so, one, we have to get serious about creating a teacher pipeline, working directly with our high school young people, working with our teachers to identify students, to start that dual enrollment opportunities right then and there. It provides a mentorship with that young person, but it helps give life to that teacher as well because they see the incoming workforce coming in right behind them. They have a responsibility in making sure that our students, as well as that new teacher, is on the right path to success. It's also about making sure that teachers come to the table. Teachers need to be a part of the process, and not just creating these laws, but also when it comes down to implementation, when it comes down to the rulemaking, because you all are the experts, and you need to have a seat at the table. Because if you're not at the table, as I always say, you're on the middle.
Representative Long.
I would get really annoyed when I would hear about the teacher shortage. And because it's been a shortage of respect for teachers that has gotten us here. And it is not enough just to repeal Act 10. We must put a stake in it. I would like to see Act 10 as a ballot referendum question so that we can put it into the Wisconsin Constitution that everyone has the right to a union and to collectively bargain. We need to make sure that there are educated voices on the school board, that we have a seat on the school board. And I went back to the benefits that I said we should be offering the same benefits that Robin Ross and I have to our educators, the health benefits, retirement. And I think it's critical that the helpline absolutely needs to ensure that teachers are paid, our student teachers are paid during the student teaching, that we are helping to build mentorships, that we are ensuring that our educators who have many of the same lived experiences as some of our most vulnerable students have the opportunity to continue to go back to those classrooms and support those students. I think so often though that this demonizing of our educators, again, very intentional by the Republicans, is something that we all have a responsibility to stand up and defend our teachers. It is not enough to say we want to do this for you. It's important that we go to the board meetings and tell the Republicans that this attack on our educators is an attack on our public schools and it's an attack on our students. When it comes to retention, it's the first 5 years of a new teacher in our public schools. It's so formative and it's so difficult for so many of those young teachers right now. which is why building not only mentorship programs, but ensuring that there are opportunities for them to actually see that we need to build in the prep time, that we make sure that our teachers are the ones responsible for all basic services, like the wraparound services that so many of the students are missing, that they deserve to have not only their voice, but that support from their board, their community, and of course the state.
Secretary Hughes.
As I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about Mrs. Gilmartin and Mrs. Welch and Mrs. Harris and Mrs. Adams and Mr. Capigliano, my public school teachers, and the idea of how we treated them as pillars in our community and as so critical parts of our family. And to think about how public school teachers are portrayed now by the Republicans and scapegoated and blamed, it is really unforgivable. We can make changes in our state by making sure that we are financially supporting our teachers, that we have restored the ability for collective bargaining and receiving benefits. Where I live on the west side of the state, we are seeing teachers cross the river to go to Minnesota for work and come back to Wisconsin because they can get better pay and better benefits by teaching in Minnesota. And that's just absolutely unforgivable. We have to recognize that teachers have choices, that they can go either to another state or to another profession. And that's what we see again and again. And so we have to respect that teachers are a part of the marketplace and make sure that we are competitive in that marketplace, keeping our teachers in the classrooms. And we do have to stand up for our teachers. We do have to have leaders that say, no, when you are creating that blame, when you are doing that scapegoating, that is inappropriate and not true. Right now, so many of the commentary, the things that happen at school board meetings, the things that happen in the media are left unchallenged. And we need leaders who step in at every moment and say, no, stand with the teachers. Parents, you need to be here. You need to be supporting the teachers. We all need to be doing that. And that is work that relies on strong leaders. We see what's happening with the leadership right now in Washington and with the Republican leadership, devastating our teachers, and we need new leadership to step in and protect and support.
Lieutenant Governor Barnes.
So the disrespect of the teaching profession isn't anything new. My dad got a degree in elementary education, and he decided to go work on an assembly line instead. He knew he would have better pay and wouldn't have to deal with all the challenges and the disrespect that came with that profession. And that was a real long time ago. But if we were to fast forward to present day context, the reason why our teachers are being scapegoated is because of Republican neglect. Now, in the legislature, again, we've all talked about the lack of resources that flow into our schools, but to paint a brighter picture or a more vivid picture of this, we have teachers who are expected to do everything. They've been stripped of all their tools and are still expected to build a house somehow. These are the teachers who spend time after school providing mentorship to students. Teachers who may see something in one of their students and realize that food insecurity is an issue and spends money out of their own pockets to bring lunch or bring dinner to students. Teachers got to pay for their own supplies and own decorations for classes, and they do it, they continue to do it because the future is that important. And true enough, it is. But the folks who are providing that access to opportunity through education need to be more valued and more respected. And it's important for us to restore collective bargaining rights, of course, to educators, to everybody in the state for that matter, who wants to be a part of a union. And we also have to increase teacher salary, because if we aren't providing our teachers with enough money to only have one job, I can't tell you how many teachers I know with multiple jobs just to pay the bills, just to keep up, just to be able to afford their mortgage, just to be able to afford that vacation. It is a sad state of affairs when the folks who are providing the most vital resource to establishing any sort of future in this state are going without, or feeling like they have been left behind, or feeling as if their profession is not worthy. The teachers, I can tell you right now, have given so much and received so little and have been neglected by the legislature. That's why we need to fight to change the legislature.
Secretary Blunt.
You know, a couple of months ago, I found myself on a Thursday night without somebody to drive me and accompany me to a place place that I was going, which was probably 120 miles away. And I called a former coach and teacher of mine. He coached me in baseball in high school. Look at me, that was a few years ago. It was like 40 years ago. But on a day's notice, on less than a day's notice, he was there for me, he accompanied me, we had a ball. It would be one of the things that I will remember. We all could go through things like that. That's what teachers are in our communities and in our lives. The job that I had in state government was, as the Secretary of Administration, was responsible for all of the human resources across state government. So when Act 10 was passed, it not only had a chilling effect on teaching, the teaching profession, but on prison guards, on people who work in the state, people who work in public service, who felt like they had a target on their back now. And that hasn't subsided over the last 16 years. So we absolutely need to change that. We need to elevate respect and regard. We need to reestablish that. Teachers need to be paid in ways that show that we respect them. Those are the types of things that the steps that we can take immediately. I think we can also honor teachers by ensuring that they are getting the training that they need, that they have every opportunity to have the access to the tools inside the classroom. Because as has been said here, the expectation is that they're going to deal with all the issues that they have in the classroom and the learning challenges that we have all across our state and outcomes that we don't like, but they are also expected to do that and to deal with people who come in hungry, kids who are unhoused, who have housing challenges, kids who have stressors at home. All of those things are part of what we ask teachers to do. So it's high time that we have a governor and a legislature who have that respect and regard, and we can make the value statements in the budgets that we pass, the resources that we provide, that ensure that teachers know and believe that we have the respect and the regard and say that we have for them.
Senator Royce. Don't fill this time. Oh, sure, whatever you prefer.
We're making our own decisions here.
That's right.
So I appreciate this. I remember during COVID, all of the rhetoric around teachers and around what was happening within the school districts, and it was so frustrating to me. Because as a product of public schools, as somebody whose both of their children are in public schools, I have seen what public school teachers do for our children, how transformative that is. My mom was a teaching assistant for children with special needs and was there when Act 10 got passed, when they stripped union bargaining rights away from teachers and teaching assistants. She was a union member. And she saw what has happened since then. The number of teaching assistants that were in classrooms for children with special needs has gone down dramatically. We are not meeting the needs of our kids. When we do not respect teachers with salary and with benefits that they deserve, this is going to push teachers into other professions. I have spoken to so many teachers who have left. They wanted to stay, but they ended up working someplace else because they didn't feel like they got the respect that they need. And we need to work on the pipeline. You know, as the chair of the Healthcare Workforce Task Force, I think that clinicians and teachers, it's very similar. We can use those same interventions, making sure we do loan repayments. And maybe if you don't need loan repayments, a down payment on a house, so that you can move to places where we know that we have shortages. But working to make sure we increase that pipeline, I'm really proud that the Evers-Rodriguez administration has one of the first apprenticeship models for teachers in the United States. They are taking teaching assistants, paying them full-time wages, full-time benefits, putting them through school so that they can get a bachelor's in education and then never have to leave their job to be able to do that. That is the thing that we can expand in the state, and as governor, that is something that I would prioritize.
Royce, the number one factor in the success of our kids is the teacher in the front of the classroom. Schools are teachers, and it's not enough to just repeal Act 10, although I was there in the assembly fighting against it, and moved my desk out into the frozen ground when Scott Walker and Tom Tiffany tried to shut down the Capitol. We also have to restore the respect and the professional autonomy that has been stripped away from teachers. Because Act 10 wasn't just about money. It was about demoralizing and dehumanizing teachers and taking away their voice. Republicans, right-wingers, think we should be replacing teachers with AI. They think we should be forcing teachers to just teach to tests. I think nobody knows better what a kid needs, every individual kid needs, than the teacher who is teaching. And we have to free and empower teachers to be able to practice their profession. Yes, of course, we need to raise wages and benefits. Yes, we should have teacher representation on school boards and everywhere that decisions about education are made, including in my administration. Yes, we should be paying student teachers, of course. But at the end of the day, I care about teachers because I care about kids and I care about our schools. And I am so proud to be the candidate in this race that has earned the trust and the support of Wisconsin's teachers. I've been endorsed by RIA, the state teachers union, and that matters not just because of their reach and their resources. It matters because teachers are the ones who have the moral authority. They are speaking for our children at a time when Republicans have attacked them again and again for doing so. And I will be the governor of public education who champions teachers and who brings back the respect that our teachers are owed. And by the way, the bill to let everyone buy into the state healthcare program, which will help save teachers money, is my bill. It's called Healthcare, and we will help empower school districts to save money and give teachers raises with better treatment.
We're going to begin with Representative Long for this next question. We're going to ask the candidates to keep their answers to a minute for this question because they each, in their way, have already addressed this a wee bit. But we cannot talk about K-12 education without talking about voucher schools, choice, and charter schools. Part of the push to include these as options and to push taxpayer funding to them is that some parents are dissatisfied with public schools. However, there is very little evidence that these alternatives consistently improve student performance or do so more cost efficiently. And in fact, many claim that these are nothing more than thinly veiled mechanisms by which to defund public schools at the expense of the most at-risk and disadvantaged students. So, my question to begin with you, Representative Long, is this: what reforms, oversight, and accountability policies do you propose for voucher schools as you transition out, which I know is part of your platform, and for each candidate to answer according to their plan? Thank you.
Public dollars belong in public schools, and we do have to ensure that there is a responsible end to the voucher program. I think one of the most important things that we have to do is ensure that there is parity between for special education reimbursement. It's 90% reimbursement for public schools, and it is for many of the voucher programs, for the voucher schools. The other piece is, other schools are not required to have licensed educators. They don't move in the same auditing processes or are under a lot of similar jurisdictions provided by the Department of Public Instruction. Every school should have licensed teachers there as well as concerned. There is a lack of transparency and accountability, and I think we have to look at making sure that the schools are receiving vouchers, have those students and those families that have sent their kids to a public school. The majority of the families who are participating in the voucher program have had their kids in private schools. Over 800,000 students in our state go to public schools, and it is deeply irresponsible, both fiscally and morally, to have more of our public tax dollars go second out to public schools. And so, also, the caps, we have to maintain the caps on that participation while we work to make sure that there is a responsible end through all of the voucher programs, including the ones in Milwaukee may see. And remember, why these were proposed in the first place. We have failed Black and brown students in this state for generations. How can we make sure that they're at the table for when we are putting the end to this program and ensure that, again, we continue to invest in public schools because it is prioritizing public schools is good for all communities.
Secretary Hughes. You just want to do one thing, right? If you can. Okay.
We've talked tonight about the public school funding and the need to prioritize public school funding. And we recognize that we have to fill that bucket first. That is the priority that we are setting, that I am hearing again and again around the state. As we build that funding, as we build that formula, we have to institute transparency same way we have transparency and accountability for any public dollars that are spent. When I was secretary of WEDC, if we gave a $100,000 grant to a community or to a business, they had to account for every penny of those dollars. They had to have certified financial audits accounting for those dollars. We need that kind of accountability with the spending of the money, and then we need accountability around the performance of the students in the schools that are receiving those dollars. And as we put that into place, and we have the transparency on our property tax bills, of anything that is going to voucher schools, we will be able to build the system that creates the political power for fully funding our public schools, for maintaining that, and for making sure that that, again, is the very first choice for our parents when they are looking at where to send their kids.
Lieutenant Governor.
I think we've all been sold something and it didn't turn out to be what we thought it would be when we ended up getting it. And that's what's happening with so many of our parents who thought that it would be a better option for them to opt into the voucher program. So many people, so many parents unfortunately signed up and didn't get what they were expected. And the reality is, it's not that parents are necessarily dissatisfied with public schools, they are dissatisfied with what our public schools have been left with. And that is why we have to continue this fight to make sure that all of our schools have everything that they need so that our students can thrive, so that our students can get ahead, and we can build well-rounded, well-balanced communities. Now, this happens through accountability, which has not been the case. So many schools in their voucher program have limited to no accountability at all. And we don't see the same horror stories as we've seen, back in the day where schools were closed overnight. But as I do believe public dollars belong in public schools, the fact is any school receiving a dime of public money, as any entity receiving a dime of public money, there should be a public set of standards, public scrutiny, public governance, public oversight. And that's not what we've been witnessing. And I can tell you that almost overnight, the bad actors will be gone from the program if we immediately implemented a system of accountability. That is what we have to do. That is the safest and most responsible path to an off-ramp for this program that is taking so much money away from our public schools.
Mr. Secretary.
So I would say I've already expressed a couple of ways in which I think we can start to rein in some of what's going on with the most egregious things in the voucher. I told you that the largest recipient to the tune of more than $40 million is a school that most of the students attend virtually. That's a loophole that we can close. As was mentioned before, up until this year, there's been a cap on the statewide program at 10%. After this year, that cap goes up. That's something that if we're responsible, we need to be making sure we're putting that back on. There is a transparency argument we made in the city of Green Bay. On your property tax bill, you get to see how much money is going off to voucher schools. We could do that statewide. Those are the types of things that give people the level of information, the level of confidence that they know where their dollars are being spent. When it comes to accountability, I can tell you this. I think that good schools, all good schools want accountability, no matter what kind of school they are. And we should make sure that we are entering into a path that we can provide that level of accountability. But I'll also tell you this. I spent the morning at a Milwaukee charter school, at Milwaukee College Prep. They have 4 campuses, and they have several hundred students. And I saw teachers, and I saw kids who were performing well. That's the bottom line for me. It's about outcomes for us, it's about outcomes for kids. How are we ensuring that there are more kids who come to Bayview High School well prepared? How are we ensuring that we do the things that ensure that kids are ready to take that next leap? I'm going to be a governor that is about making sure that there is a level of accountability, about transparency, but more than anything else, around the outcomes that all of us deserve, that our kids deserve.
Madam Lieutenant Governor, as we pass the mic down.
I've heard the 2 kids, 17 and 19-year-old, and I think we need to have some grace for the parents who are just trying to make the best decision for their child. My son went to the big public school, excelled in all the AP classes, he's in college right now. My daughter's on her 3rd high school, still in the public school system, but we needed to make a different choice for her. And the really big large high school just wasn't working for her. She just fell right through the cracks. So having a smaller environment where she's able to get more one-on-one attention was a successful thing for her. And it was an alternative school within the public school system. So having choices like that for parents, I think is really important. You've already heard many of the things that we can do already with the voucher program. If you want to take public dollars, you have to have the same standards as we have at public schools. Absolutely. And I think Mandela Barnes is right, that many of those who are going to be unwilling to meet those standards, and some of them will no longer be able to accept those vouchers. A couple other things that we can do is to make sure that families are meeting an income level every year they're enrolling within the voucher program. So right now, if they enroll in kindergarten, they don't really have to recheck their income ever again. And I know an income can change pretty significantly from kindergarten into high school. These are very simple things that we can change, but it cannot be overnight, and you can't pull the rug out underneath some of those children. Right now in Milwaukee, 50% of kids are on a voucher today. If we took that away tomorrow, that's not good for the child, it's not good for the community, the Milwaukee public school system could not afford it. So any decisions that we are making has to be child and community centered.
We've heard a lot of talking points about this, but what we haven't heard yet is a plan to actually bring the failed voucher scheme to a responsible end. So that's what I'm going to share with you today. I actually have a plan to do this. And step one is accountability, transparency, and non-discrimination. Accountability means if you take $1 of public money, the kids have to take a board exam, the teachers have to be licensed, you have to meet the same standards. Transparency means your books are open, right? No grift, no corruption, and transparency for taxpayers, because we all deserve to know how much of our money that looks like on our property tax bills are going to public schools, but they're not. They're being siphoned off in vouchers. Step two, it deals with the statewide expansion. Everything that is not Milwaukee and Lacey. The vast majority of kids attending those schools were already in private school at their parents' expense. And we will say at the beginning of the next school year, the state will no longer pick up the tab. Public dollars are for public education. Step three is Milwaukee and Lacey. Now these programs have been in place for much longer, and a much larger percentage of students in those districts are in those programs. And so nobody is talking about ending over them. In fact, it's very disruptive to move kids out of an educational setting where they are thriving. And when you have the accountability, transparency, and non-discrimination in place, then those schools can actually meet those conditions. We will allow every single child and their siblings to complete their education. And over time, we will build up the capacity of the public school system so that they can meet the needs of every kid. We will also offer any voucher school the chance to become a public charter so that they are under public local control. I'm for innovation in public education, but I want it to happen within the public school system, and no more discrimination against students, staff, or teachers.
Mr. Tony,
Thank you. So when it comes down to the voucher schools, I think it's extremely important that we have to make sure that our public schools are schools of choice. Which means that we have to fully fund our public schools first and foremost. Because when I think about communities like Milwaukee, if we did end the voucher system today, right now, MPS would not have the capacity to take on those children. I mean, let's be honest, MPS doesn't have the capacity to take on the children that they currently have because we're not fully funding our public schools today. And so when it comes down to the voucher system, it's extremely important that we're transparent, that they're held accountable, and that they're held to the same standards as our public schools. Because here in the city of Milwaukee, we have seen these fly-by-night schools. We have seen graduating seniors come back to get their transcripts, and all of a sudden, they can't go to college because the school is no longer in existence. We can no longer have that. Part of accountability is making sure that we can see what exactly is going on. That those teachers understand what their real role is. The child. Transparency is making sure that when you open your property tax bill, it's going into the voucher system. And I think that we need that statewide to make sure everyone understands how much money is going into that system. But also, when it comes down to accountability, they have to be held to the same standards. Right now, we're comparing our public schools to our choice of charter schools, and it's apples and oranges right now. It's not an apples to apples comparison because our schools right here in the public schools are held to a much higher standard. And I would say that when you see these voucher schools, particularly when they bring on students with disabilities, and all of a sudden they get the third Friday count, they send them right back to public schools. But there need to be a penalty for that. They can't continue to take on children just to bring in this money and then cycle them back to the public schools when they're not going to be able to receive the dollars to make sure they're getting the best education possible. Because it's not just those students who are going in between the choice of the public schools that are being hurt, it's everybody within the public system that's being hurt. That's why we need a long-term plan when it comes down to publicly funding our school systems, our public schools, making sure that we're holding our vouchers and charter schools accountable.
Thank you. Secretary Hughes will have the last question. Yes, we made it, everybody. The last question. We'll have you begin. Last month, Governor Evers and legislative Republican leaders proposed a compromise bill that would have increased school funding and would have provided a property tax rebate. At the time, many Senate Democrats opposed it because of the projected structural deficit in 2029 that would occur if there was zero economic growth. Now, reporting just this week indicates that perhaps that bill is not quite dead and that it may come before the state legislature again. A recent poll puts public support of this bill at 80%. So I want to ask each of you what your current position on the compromise bill is. But more importantly, I want to ask each of you what you want to promise to these folks here and the folks that will be voting on August 11th. What can you do that's better than this bill if Democrats do not have a trifecta? If they do not control both the Assembly and the Senate? I think voters want to know. We'll begin with you, Secretary Hughes.
Thank you. I was the only candidate on the stage that came out strongly in favor of the bill. And the reason I did that is because governing is hard. And I know, having worked with Governor Evers for 6.5 years, that he worked day in, day out, protecting Wisconsinites, protecting us from Republican overreach. He was the ultimate bully with many, many shots being taken on him. And when he presented the compromise bill, I understood that he believed that this was the very best thing for the state at the time with the cards that were on the table. And I understand that governing is hard and that reaching compromise is what our democracy is about. And leadership is taking a beat and saying, what is the context of this bill and does it make sense? I didn't need a poll to tell me that Wisconsin was going to be in favor of this. As I travel around the state, Wisconsinites wonder why Madison doesn't work. They wonder why we can't get things done. And when there was a bipartisan bill presented, we saw politics as usual. We saw press releases, we saw tweets, we saw insults, and I did not find that to be what Wisconsin wants. Right now, we have schools that desperately need funding, that are going and laying off people right now, that are going to a referendum in the next election. These funds needed to get to our schools. Again and again, folks are facing property tax challenges. And while the property tax rebate wouldn't have solved everyone's financial challenges, it demonstrated an awareness that after having that surplus in our state, in our capital for many, many years, we needed to get those dollars back in a time when many Wisconsinites were struggling. That's why I supported that bill. As we move forward, we don't know what's going to happen in November. Of course, we hope that we have a trifecta, but that's getting done. And dealing in the context that you have. If we don't have a trifecta, I will work day in and day out with all of the legislators to make sure that we put our priorities first, to advocate for public schools, to say as we are elected, as I was elected governor, there was a mandate for public school funding and supporting public school funding, and I will fight for that. but I have worked with Republicans. I'm the only secretary that was confirmed twice unanimously by the Republican Senate. I can sit down at the table, I can work with them, and I can govern, and that is what we need from the next government.
Lieutenant Governor Ross.
So what the polls show was that people all across the state of Wisconsin are in desperate need of relief, as half of folks' discretionary income is going to pay for gas. Now, when things are this difficult, when everything costs so much more, of course, more money in your pockets immediately is something that folks that not just desperately need, but should absolutely be the reality for folks. Costs have gone up because of poor decision making by Republicans. It is the war in Iran that is costing us more at the gas pump. It is the fact that we haven't expanded Badger Care under the Affordable Care Act, where people are paying more for health insurance premiums. It is the fact that we haven't seen an increase in the minimum wage since it went up to $7.25. That's making it so hard for people to be able to get by. Now, when it comes to the compromise bill, what this really shows is that there needs to be more legislative days in session. Now, if we had more session days in the legislature, in the Assembly, and the Senate, we could have more time for more long, thought-out process when it comes to developing policy that truly impacts people. This is a serious undertaking, and the reason why we have that surplus in the first place is because the needs of the people of the state of Wisconsin have yet to be addressed. It's because our schools aren't fully funded. It's because we haven't invested in healthcare as we should. It's because the mental health support isn't the reality in school districts across Wisconsin. It's because we haven't made the necessary investments to make Wisconsin the best place to live, work, and raise a family. That's how we ended up in that surplus. Now, how that is spent, now the negotiations, in my opinion, should happen with people who are going to be around in 2027. Not with folks who are going to be retired. We're going to have a new governor, a new Senate Majority Leader, and a new speaker, regardless of what the party looks like. That means new negotiating partners. That means new opportunities for the state of Wisconsin to reach its most full potential. It is at that point where we can come up with the most sound policy. And again, more legislative days would have kept us out of this mess because we could have had real thoughtful debate. We could have engaged the public even more, and we could have come up with a real solution that would not have ended up with a structural deficit. And the governor has done an amazing job against a hostile legislature. My hat goes off to him. But since my time in the state assembly and during my time as lieutenant governor, Robin Ross has never been a trusted partner. And I cannot trust them to deal or come up with the best solutions for a surplus that he won't even be around to be held accountable for. Now, what I can promise you in this room right now is we are here to defend public education. I have taken on the tough fight. I continue to take on the tough fights. I will put it all on the line to ensure that our have the support and resources that they need, regardless of what the legislature looks like. Regardless of if I'm in office or not, I am still going to continue to fight for our public schools because our public schools gave me an opportunity, and it is important to make sure that every child growing up in the state of Wisconsin has at least the same opportunities that I have.
Secretary Brown.
You know, I worked with the governor to put together 2 budgets as the Secretary of Administration, and I know the challenges of doing it. The idea that we would enter into the next budget with a $3 billion deficit potentially makes that materially harder for all the stuff that we were talking about making investments. The surplus that's expected is expected at the end of next June. We're in a Donald Trump economy. If anybody trusts that we are going to have, that we can absolutely be certain that what we expect at the end of next June is going to happen, then we're more trusting of Donald Trump than I am, and then that we should be. Here's one other thing about the bill. If this auditorium were filled, we took this third of the seats over here, we filled them with people whose only income is Social Security, or if you made so little that you don't have a tax liability. That third of the auditorium, they get nothing. Those are the people who, when they put money in their pockets, by the way, they spend it. If you're going to do something that's trying to stimulate the economy, put money in people's pockets, it ought to be spent. If you're only doing that for the people who are doing well, you're not doing right by Wisconsin. So, those are the things that I think are in trouble. When we peel back the layer of this, sure, it sounds good. Sure, everybody wants that. We want the investment in public education. We want the investments that help in property tax down. We want those not just for 6 months. We want it for 6 years. We want 16 years of something better than what we got, starting with Scott Walker being elected in 2010. If you want to know the first thing that I would do, we haven't talked about it tonight, but I'll tell you the first thing that I would say we would do with that surplus is at the end of June, money is running out for daycares and early childhood education in the state of Wisconsin. There's $1.5 billion that sits on the sidelines every year in productivity, mainly women, because they can't find accessible, affordable, or high-quality daycare. The state was one of the last ones to put money into early childhood, one of the last 6 states to do it starting last year. We did it for 1 year. The budget is for 2 years. So what I would do, the first thing that I would do, and I would work my butt off to ensure that we get $110 million to at least prop up this failing early childhood system so that we can fix in the next budget. Those are the things that are going to have impact. Yes, we like when things sound good, but we absolutely need if and when we're going to govern effectively.
Lieutenant Governor Rodriguez. Do I want to invest in our public schools? Yes. Do I want to provide economic relief because people are hurting? Yes. This bill had bipartisan support and bipartisan opponents to that. And one of the things that we talked about here is that the tax rebates that people would have gotten were not necessarily focused on those who needed it. My mom, she's 8 years old. She lives with me. She's on a fixed income. She would not have received the tax rebate. However, my brother and sister-in-law, who are both executives within their respective careers, would have received the tax rebate. And so this type of legislation requires conversation. And what I'm going to be focused on is moving forward. I'm really proud of what Governor Evers and our administration has done for education in the state, but it's simply not enough. We have got to make sure that we are fully funding our public schools, that we are making that the special education funding meet the needs of the schools in Wisconsin. And when we're talking about it, what I can do as governor, regardless of who's in the leadership within the Assembly and the Senate, is use that woman pulpit of the governor's office to call out those purple district Republicans. To say, you want to know why your school is not fully funded? You want to know why your tax bill is so high, your property taxes are so high? It's because Representative Smith is refusing to vote to fund your public schools. That's what the next governor can do, regardless of who else is in power.
Senator Royce. Governing is hard. It is. And you know how I know that? Because I am the only person on the stage that has served in a Democratic majority. And I remember being elected to my first term in the Assembly in 2009, the first Democratic trifecta in 24 years in the midst of the Bush recession. And the first thing that we had to do is pass the budget repair bill to just keep the lights on in state government until June. And then when we had to pass the budget, we furloughed public employees. We made cuts to education and higher ed and healthcare. I will never, ever put Wisconsin in that kind of a dire fiscal position ever again. And the easiest thing in the world would have been for me to just vote yes to a deal that writes people a check. Not the people who need it, but writes people a check right before election time. I'm on the ballot August 11th and say, hey, you're welcome. Oh, let's pay lip service to funding public schools, even though 20% of this deal is for public schools, and the other 80% is for Republican priorities. And who cares if it's going to create a $2.9 billion deficit down the road? But I'm not going to do that, because leadership means doing the right thing, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And I'm going to give credit to this individual who didn't have to vote on this and yet took a position. Seeing how you're going to vote on something should be a requirement if you're going to run for governor. People deserve to know how we think and how we make decisions. And that's why I've been very transparent about why I oppose this deal. It's not because it was a bad deal that they were trying to force through in 48 hours before we even got to fiscal year 1. It's because it didn't pass the test of being good for Wisconsin. It get us closer to solving these long-term problems that we desperately need to solve. And as governor, I will pledge to you that in the very first week of my administration, we will pass an emergency friendly bill, and we will do it regardless of whether we have a Democratic trifecta, to help our schools get the special ed money they were promised by Republicans and didn't get. And by the way, we'll also fund early childhood education and the stewardship program, which also, both of those funds run out on June 30th of this year. So we can do that, but we can't spend money that doesn't exist yet, and the surplus was just a projection. That projection was made before Trump attacked Iran and gas prices went up. You think that might change the economic outlook? And it's also not a surplus when you haven't paid your bills. The state has not paid its bills, especially on public education. That money, whatever money materializes, rightly belongs to our kids, and the governor, I'm going to put it there.
County Executive Cole.
Yeah, just to borrow a line from the former Lieutenant Governor, I think there are a lot of people who are desperate for this bill, and desperation is settled in for a lot of us. You know, when I take a look at all the different candidates up here, I think we all have a wide range of experience, but I'm the only one up who actually has experience running government. Not just running government, running one of the most challenged levels of government in the entire state of Wisconsin, because I was coming in facing a $100 million deficit. So when you talk about compromise, I know what it means to bring our county board to the table and making sure that we're actually working together to tackle the issues. Because not one single person, not one single organization is going to take all of us coming to the table to make sure that we're going in the right direction. And that's what I would do different, make sure that there are more people at the table, right? I think that Governor Evers and the leaders are doing what they can to try to do something to deliver to the people of Wisconsin. And as many people up here talk about, they don't know if they can trust one another. And I can understand that. But it's not about trust. It's about doing our damn job. It's about delivering the resources that these communities need each and every single day, making sure that our schools have the necessary resources that they need. But more importantly, we also need to make sure that when we're providing the economic relief, it's coming from the bottom up, making sure that our most vulnerable residents are the ones who are going to be benefiting from this. Because they may not have a savings account to go to. They may not have a 401k or a pension to pull out from. They're looking for some level of relief right now and for it to happen today. And so it's extremely important that when we look at this particular bill, that we're actually understanding that we need compromise. And if I was governor today, this bill would look different. We'll see more money coming to our public schools. We'll see more economic relief. And more importantly, we'll see more people at the table actually helping to make these decisions. Because at the end of the day, what we're missing right now at the federal level, at the state level, it is compromise. Because we don't trust one another, we're not actually passing bills that benefit the people who are in this room and outside these walls. You can't match more crazy with crazy, otherwise we're just going to be going crazy. And so right now, let's focus on how do we actually compromise. You don't have to give up your morals, your values, your ethics, and what you believe in order to make sure that you and your neighbors are getting what they need in order for us to move forward like our state mouse says.
Representative Holmes is going to have the last word of the evening, and then we will put up on the screen the QR code so that you can give us some feedback on what you heard tonight and if it's had an impact on who you may be voting for on what. August 11, myvote.wi.gov. Thank you all so much. Representative Holmes, the last word of the evening.
The people of Wisconsin deserve better. I would vote no on that bill again, because the governor should not be someone who sells out any community. To vote on a bill that would hurt some of our most vulnerable folks right now, where we deserve permanent fixes for the growth of so many problems, to meet it with incrementalism and a bill that would put more people in harm's way in the future. At its core, at our core, the role of an elected official is to lessen suffering, and I voted no on that bill because that would not do it. It is imperative that we recognize that we can do something right now to ensure that there's a democratic trifecta. And I am so incredibly proud of the community of volunteers, voters, supporters from all across the state, even some from outside the state, who are paying attention to Wisconsin right now, working, knocking doors, text banking, talking to their neighbors, having difficult political conversation where folks are voting for trifecta right now. Yes, I passed bipartisan legislation for education on race university. So I will, of course, work across the aisle to deliver and sacrifice for the people. And I think compromise ultimately comes down to how are you going to present a vision where people see themselves in it? And we're doing that right now by prioritizing public schools. It is an issue that impacts every community in our state. And so, I think moving forward, if we're going to have a state that actually belongs to everyone, we have to prioritize public education. We need to ensure that we're working for that trifecta right now, and that there is a governor who is always going to be willing to say, I will not sell you out, I will put you and your family first.
Ladies and gentlemen, what is coming through? Folks, if you'd like to get feedback, as you want to get on the screen, you can come up right in front here. My friend Steve has got the QR code on his laptop. So we're going to come up, you can use the laptop in the front of the
At least you had it for a second. There you go.
I didn't even know.